So a while ago I gave kind of a introduction video, a little bit of a review of the Ontario Rat 7 this last winter when I was on a trip, and I basically used it unmodified at that point. There were not many modifications made to it. I did carry a Kydex sheath that I always carry with me. This is from our Bagwell on eBay. It's got kind of a tech lock deal on there, and then I went ahead and threw on a fire still loop of my own. But it's a really decent sheath. If you're curious about the lockup, it's great. This one was really, really good. I've had some from that company that were just a little bit on the tight side. I'll let them know about that, and I think they're probably improving their sheaths overall because that one was really, really good. So when I was on that trip, I was kind of evaluating some things that I wanted to go ahead and modify, and sometimes with a blade, it makes me a little nervous to modify things because there's no undoing. Once you do it with a blade, once you modify the edge, it's really hard to bring things back to the factory, status or how they were, especially with that edge. So the first thing I noticed when I used this blade for an extended period of time, for months, first thing that really stuck out to me was that handle is wide enough, it's broad enough, but it's too boxy. It is just too boxy. There's a lot of squaring on the scales, and essentially for my hand, it just made hot spots, especially when you're chopping. But carving and things like that, you had limited capability because of those scales. So what I did is I went ahead, I put it in the vise, and I got a belt sander out, and I used a little bit of a belt sander, just a couple moments, because you could do damage really fast using a belt sander, even at low speeds. I used a pretty smooth one because this is my Carta, and a dust mask because I don't want cancer. And so I smoothed out just a little bit, and then I took a belt from the belt sander, I broke it in half, and I worked it by hand, and all I did is round out all of the hot spots and that squaredness that the knife comes with. And that one feature, just rounding it out, puts this on par with a lot of the new scales that like SE and a couple other companies are replacing old models with these new rounder scales because they realize those blocky scales suck. They are horrible for your hands. They're not good for anything other than taking the knife out, looking at it, and putting it back. They do not feel good on your hands. And this little modification that I've done here, it's pretty much on par with those. I think I could do with maybe just a hair of a palm swell in the middle. That would be really, really nice, but I actually don't have any problems with it. I have no gripes, no complaints yet, but it might improve it a little bit just to do that. Moving on, the blade edge itself. So the blade edge it comes with, I think Ontario, when I talked to him, it must be about 6 years ago now, I used to communicate a little bit with them, and they would share a lot of my pictures on their Facebook profile. And so I was providing with stuff like that, and kind of a good start to a relationship. But I mentioned, okay, so the sheaths suck, the scales are a little square, and the edge is such a V-grind. What are we doing here? And they went ahead and made the Cerberus, but they kept the edge exactly the same on their old knives. And what they're thinking is, I believe, is they don't want people to chip them out. These are not super hard blade steels. They use a lot of D2. They use 5160, which is one of my favorite steels. They use a little bit of 1095. I don't think they use too many other steels, maybe a handful for their machetes, but this steel ultimately, it could do with a finer edge. It was just fine. So what I did is I went ahead and thinned it out, and I did actually risk running it on a belt sander, a very cool, low setting, a smooth belt, once again, water cooled, and I sanded that out, thinned it, and I went back with the work sharp and I convexed it. And what I found is underneath that really dull V-grind edge that it had in my last video, for the most part, is a really, really scary sharp knife. This thing is crazy, crazy sharp, and it holds an edge a long time. I'm very, very happy with the hardness of this steel, actually. And when I've modified those scales, now I can do like chest lever cuts, and they're not perfect because ideally with a chest lever cut, you would have a blade that comes all the way down to here. I hate finger choils. There's just no reason. I want it to go all the way back here. I cannot fathom a reason unless you really think that you need to put your logo and your emblem here. That's a lot of companies' reason why, and you think you need some sort of sharpening choil. I don't think I need a sharpening choil. I've never needed one, and so I wish the blade came all the way back, but I live with it. And and also I took out the jimping. I forgot about that. Okay, so right here, guys, took out the jimping because that's not comfortable. Anyways, back to chest lever. you can now grab it with a decent degree of comfort, not as much as a regular bushcraft knife, but you don't have to leverage way out here. You can get it in tight to your chest and make some really deep cuts. That's a hard piece of oak that I'm cutting through right now. And man, that's awesome. So there's a decent edge to be found on there. You're gonna have to take your time to modify it. You're gonna have to take your time to make that handle comfortable. It's not gonna just happen with time. You're not gonna just eventually learn how to use it. You will have to modify that knife. But after modifying it, I can say this is my favorite flat grind knife that I currently own. I guess I don't have a lot, but I had been considering some other ones and I just don't see a reason anymore. This one for me is definitely the best survival knife, if you want to call it that. Kind of a low function bushcraft knife. It's not exactly, you know, for carving and whittling and stuff like that, but I do use it, and I do make notches, and I do a little bit of spoon work with it. I have in my last trip a little bit of craft work, and it's just really very controllable. You know, the weight of the design is actually in the hand. Oh, let's see if I can show you here. It's actually in the handle, which means that the tip is very controllable. Now, that's not just a fighting knife thing. That actually has a lot to do with maneuverability in carving. And so if you want a knife that carves really well, you can't have a handle that is too light, and you can't have a blade that's too heavy. And so for thickness, it's great as long as I thin out that edge. For durability, the coating is crap, and that's all Ontario's, and I'm okay with that. I'll probably strip it off. That'll be my next modification. For handles, they're adjustable. You can sand them out. This knife I got for 50 bucks, and after 10 years, I can see why it still sells.